Why do real programs achieve far less than the peak flops advertised by processors? Modern processors advertise enormous compute performance, but when we run real applications, we often see only a small fraction of that peak performance. Why does that happen? Today, we will see that the real limitation is not arithmetic, it is the memory system. So, modern processors advertise enormous compute numbers, hundreds of gigaflops, sometimes teraflops. But most real programs achieve only a small fraction of that peak performance. The arithmetic units are ready to compute, but they sit idle waiting for data. So today we're going to answer why that happens. The short answer is that the memory system has become the true performance bottleneck. So when vendors publish peak flops, they're computing a simple formula. Number of cores multiplied by vector width multiplied by frequency. For example, 8 cores, each capable of 8 floating point operations per cycle, running at 4 GHz, gives you 256 gigaflops per second peak. GPUs multiply this further by adding thousands of arithmetic lanes. But when we measure real applications, sparse matrix multiplication, graph traversal, and even certain ML workloads, sustained performance is often a fraction of the peak. The arithmetic units are capable of far more than what they're being fed. The question we are answering today is what constraint sustained performance? And the answer is the memory system. Peak flops measure arithmetic capability, but computers spend most of their time waiting for data. Now, latency is defined as the time between issuing a memory request and receiving data. This is typically measured using pointer chasing micro benchmarks, where each load depends on the previous one, ensuring the processor cannot overlap accesses. So, according to standard latency reference measurements, L1 is roughly 1 nanosecond, L2 around 4 nanoseconds, and the DRAM around 100 nanoseconds. On a 3 gig processor, that's 100 nanoseconds corresponds to roughly 300 clock cycles. That means a single DRAM miss can stall a 3 GHz processor for hundreds of instructions of wait time. If the next instruction depends on that load, the processor must wait. This is the core of the latency problem. Now, bandwidth is bytes per second, but programs execute instructions per cycle. So we must normalize bandwidth into bytes per instruction. Taking a concrete example, roughly 50 gigabytes per second total bandwidth divided by 4 cores divided by 4.2 gigahertz divided by roughly 3 instructions per cycle yields approximately 1 byte per instruction. Now consider that a vector instruction may consume 16 or 32 bytes of operands. If each instruction requires many bytes from DRAM, the arithmetic units will starve. The processor may need 16 or 32 bytes of operands per instruction, but DRAM can only supply roughly 1 byte per instruction. That is the bandwidth wall. Now let's define the average memory access time formally. P is the probability of a cache hit. T cache is the latency when the access hits in cache. T memory is the latency when it misses and goes to the DRAM. The term 1 minus P is the miss probability. Even if P is very high, say 95%, the remaining 5% multiplied by 100 nanoseconds dominates average access time. So as processors become faster, the relative penalty of a miss increases because arithmetic operations complete faster. But memory latency does not shrink proportionally. This equation captures the structural nature of the memory wall. Even if the miss probability is small, the miss penalty is enormous. Remember the question we started with? Why do real programs achieve so much less than peak flops? We now have the first clue: memory latency. Now, the working set is the amount of data actively used during a computation phase. If the working set fits within the cache, hit rates are high and performance is good. But once the working set exceeds cache capacity, miss rates increase rapidly. This is called a capacity miss. At that point, DRAM traffic becomes inevitable. The cache is no longer acting as fast memory, it becomes a filter for a larger, slower memory. Performance then becomes dominated by DRAM behavior. And this is exactly why algorithms that work well on small inputs suddenly slow down dramatically on large datasets. So there are two fundamentally different memory bottlenecks. First, latency bound behavior. This occurs when memory accesses are dependent. For example, pointer chasing is linked lists or graph traversal. The processor must wait for each load before issuing the next. Even if bandwidth is available, the dependency chain forces serialization. Second, bandwidth bound behavior. Now, here the workload streams large amounts of data, arrays, dense matrices, image processing, and issues many independent memory requests. The processor can overlap latency, but the total number of bytes per second required exceeds what the DRAM can supply. Now, these two bottlenecks look similar, but the solutions are completely different. The remedies are different. For latency bound code, we need more parallelism or data restructuring. For bandwidth bound code, we need to reduce total data movement or increase reuse. Now, out of order processors can overlap memory misses, but only up to a limit. The reorder buffer can track only so many instructions. The load store queue can only hold so many outstanding loads. The memory controller can only track so many requests. This limit is called memory level parallelism, MLP. If your workload generates more concurrent misses than the architecture can sustain, additional nodes must wait. This means that even with bandwidth available, limited MLP can throttle performance. In latency bound code, MLP is often the critical architectural constraint. Typical CPUs may track only a few dozen outstanding misses. Now consider a sparse matrix vector multiply. For each non-zero element, we perform a multiply and an add, two floating point operations. But we must load the matrix value and load the corresponding element of vector x. Because the matrix is sparse, these accesses are irregular. They do not follow contiguous memory layout. Spatial locality is poor. Arithmetic intensity is low. The workload is a classic example of being memory bound. The arithmetic units are idle, waiting for scattered memory accesses. This is why sparse workloads rarely achieve peak flops. Now, arithmetic intensity measures how much computation you perform per byte of memory traffic. For sparse matrix vector multiply, we perform about two floating point operations per non-zero. But we must move at least 16 bytes of data, and often more due to indexing overhead. That yields roughly 0.125 flops per byte, extremely low. Low arithmetic intensity means the workload is likely bandwidth bound. Increasing compute units will not help unless arithmetic intensity increases. Now we contrast this with the dense matrix multiplication. By blocking the matrices into tiles that fit in cache, each loaded tile can be reused many times before eviction. The arithmetic intensity grows with problem size. As n increases, the number of operations grows by n squared or n cubed, while memory traffic grows roughly as n squared if blocked correctly. This means arithmetic intensity increases with n. Dense matrix multiply can therefore approach peak compute performance. This is why GEMM is often used to benchmark peak flops. It is engineered to maximize reuse. This is why dense matrix multiplication is used to benchmark supercomputers. Now, the roofline model gives us a precise way to reason about performance. Arithmetic intensity is flops per byte moved from the memory level of interest, typically the DRAM. If your system has a peak compute capability of P peak and a peak memory bandwidth of B peak, then your achievable performance is bounded by the minimum of these two constraints. For small arithmetic intensity, performance scales linearly with AI, you are bandwidth bound. As AI increases, performance rises until it reaches the flat compute ceiling. The intersection is called the rich point. It defines the minimum arithmetic intensity required to become compute bound. This model unifies everything we've discussed earlier. Sparse matrix vector multiply sits far left. Dense matrix multiply sits far right. Now let's compare a CPU and a GPU. Suppose a CPU has 256 G-flops per second peak and 50 gigabytes per second bandwidth. The rich point is roughly 5 flops per byte. A GPU may have a higher multi-teraflop peak compute and several hundred gigabytes of bandwidth. Although bandwidth increases, compute increases faster. That shifts the rich point to the right. This means that workloads must have even higher arithmetic intensity to become compute bound on GPUs. This is why many GPU workloads remain memory bound despite enormous advertised flops. The roofline model tells us something extremely powerful. Performance is not determined only by compute. It is determined by compute and data movement. Now, high bandwidth memory increases bandwidth dramatically by stacking DRAM and using extremely wide interfaces. For example, HBM1 provides around 128 gigabytes per stack. This HBM2 around 256 and HBM3 around 512. This significantly increases the slope of the bandwidth line in the roofline model. However, the slope is still finite. Compute has continued to scale aggressively. Therefore, HBM raises the rich point but does not eliminate the fundamental trade off between compute and data movement. Now, in addition to latency and bandwidth, energy is a critical constraint. Moving data off chip requires charging large capacitances across longer distances. DRAM row activation consumes significant energy. In contrast, performing a floating point operation inside a core is relatively cheap. As a result, modern architectures prioritize reducing data movement not only for performance but for energy efficiency. And this is why near memory computing, on chip SRAM, and larger caches are actively researched. So let's synthesize everything. We quantified the latency gap. We normalized bandwidth per instruction. We defined average memory access time and saw how misprobability dominates. We built intuition using sparse and dense examples. We formalized performance using the roofline model. We observed that GPU raise compute faster than bandwidth, shifting the rich point. We saw that HBM increases bandwidth but remains finite. And we recognize that data movement is energy expensive. The conclusion is precise. Modern performance engineering is locality engineering. An engineer who improves arithmetic intensity, reducing working set size, and restructures data layout will unlock performance. And the engineer who counts only flops will not. So we now transition from diagnosis to prescription. From the roofline model and memory wall formulation in this deck, performance is bounded by compute and bandwidth. Now, since compute scaling has been strong, the limiting variables are bandwidth, latency, arithmetic intensity, and energy per bit moved. So, the future of computing is constrained by how we improve these four parameters. The question becomes, what technology options attack each term? Now, to increase bandwidth, the industry moved from DIMMs to stacked memory like HBM. By shortening the physical distance and widening the interface dramatically, HBM increases B peak substantially. But note, compute per unit area has continued scaling aggressively. So even as bandwidth doubles or triples, compute may increase faster. Packaging innovations, chiplets, interposers, 3D stacking are fundamentally about fighting the bandwidth slope in the roofline, but they do not eliminate the bound. Now, unlike bandwidth, DRAM latency has improved slowly. The fundamental delay includes row activation, sense amplification, and long interconnect traversal. These delays are rooted in physics, capacitance, and charge sensing in the DRAM cells. So, while interface speeds increase, the intrinsic latency of accessing a new DRAM row remains on the order of tens or hundreds of nanoseconds. This is why pointer chasing and graph workloads remain latency bound despite modern hardware. So, if moving data is expensive, one radical solution is to move compute closer to memory. Processing in memory integrates simple compute units within memory arrays. Near memory computing places accelerators adjacent to DRAM stacks. Larger on-die SRAM increases effective locality. Now, from the roofline perspective, this reduces the effective byte distance and increases achievable arithmetic intensity. Now, at the device level, transistor switching speeds have improved significantly with scaling, but interconnect resistance increases as wires narrow. Capacitance does not scale ideally. The RC product of global wires becomes dominant. Memory accesses require traversing long wires, often across the chip or package. Thus, even if transistors become faster, wire delay and memory access delay do not scale proportionally. The memory bottleneck is increasingly an interconnect bottleneck. Now, if the last 20 years were about transistor scaling and peak flops, the next 20 years will be about memory architecture, bandwidth scaling through packaging, latency mitigation through locality, compute moving closer to memory, software becoming explicitly data centric. The engineer who understands memory, not just arithmetic, will define future performance. So now we may answer the question we started with. Peak flops assume arithmetic units are always busy, but in real systems, performance is limited by data movement, latency, bandwidth, and locality. And that is why peak flops rarely predict sustained performance.